The ego feared for its position, frightened that it would dissolve back into the inner self from which it came. Yet, in its emergence, it provided the inner self with a new kind of feedback, a different view, not only of itself, but through this the inner self was able to glimpse possibilities of development of which it had not previously been aware. In your terms, by the time of Christ, the ego was sure enough of its position so that the projected picture of God could begin to change. The inner self is in a state of constant growth. The inner portions of each man, therefore, projected this knowledge outward. The need, the psychological and spiritual need of the species, demanded both interior and exterior alterations of great import. Qualities of mercy and understanding that had been buried could now surface. Not only privately, but en masse they surged up, adding a new impetus and giving a natural new direction, beginning to call all portions of the self, as it knew itself, together. So the concept of God began to change as the ego recognized its reliance upon inner reality. But the drama had to be worked out within the current framework. Mohammedanism was basically so violent precisely because Christianity was basically so gentle. Not that Christianity was not mixed with violence, or that Mohammedanism was devoid of love. But as the psyche went through its developments and battled with itself, denying some feelings and characteristics and stressing others, so the historical religious exterior dramas represented and followed these inner aspirations, struggles, and searches. All of this material now given must be considered along with the fact that beneath these developments there are the eternal aspects and creative characteristics of a force that is both undeniable and intimate. All that is, in other words, represents the reality from which all of us sprang. All that is, by its nature, transcends all dimensions of activity, consciousness, or reality, while being a part of each. Behind all faces there is one face. Yet this does not mean that each man's face is not his own. The future religious drama of which I have spoken, in your terms still to come, represents another stage in both the internal and external dramas in which the emergent ego becomes aware of much of its heritage. While maintaining its own status, it will be able to have much greater commerce with other portions of the self, and also to offer to the inner self opportunities of awareness that the inner self of its own could not procure. The journeys of the gods, therefore, represent the journeys of man's own consciousness projected outward. All that is, however, is within each such adventure. Its consciousness and its reality is within each man and within the gods he has created. The gods attain, of course, a psychic reality. I am not saying, therefore, that they are not real, but I am to some extent defining the nature of their reality. It is to some extent true to say, be careful of the gods you choose, for you will reinforce each other. Such an alliance sets up certain fields of attraction. A man who attaches himself to one of the gods is necessarily attaching himself largely to his own projections. Some, in your terms, are creative and some destructive, though the latter are seldom recognized as such. The open concept of all that is, however, frees you to a great extent from your own projections and allows a more valid contact with the spirit that is behind the reality that you know. In this chapter, I would also like to mention several other pertinent points. Some ancient tales have come down through the centuries that tell of various gods and demons who guard the gates, so to speak, of other levels of reality and stages of consciousness. Astral levels are neatly laid out, numbered, and categorized. There are tests to pass before entry. There are rituals to be acted out. Now, all of this is highly distorted. Any attempt to so rigorously and precisely express inner reality is bound to be abortive, highly misleading, and in your terms sometimes dangerous, for you do create your own reality and live it according to your inner beliefs. Therefore, be careful also in these beliefs that you accept. Let me take this moment to state again that there are no devils or demons except as you create them out of your belief. As mentioned earlier, good and evil effects are basically illusions. In your terms, all acts, regardless of their seeming nature, are a part of a greater good. I am not saying that a good end justifies what you would consider an evil action. While you still accept the effects of good and evil, then you had better choose the good. I am saying this as simply as possible. There are profound complications beneath my words, however. Opposites have validity only in your own system of reality. They are a part of your root assumptions, and so you must deal with them as such. They represent, however, deep unities that you do not understand. Your conception of good and evil results in large part from the kind of consciousness you have presently adopted. You do not perceive wholes, but portions. The conscious mind focuses with a quick, limited, but intense light, perceiving from a given field of reality only certain stimuli. It then puts these stimuli together, forming the liaison of similarity. Anything that it does not accept as a portion of reality, it does not perceive. The effect of opposites results, then, from a lack of perception. Since you must operate within the world as you perceive it, then the opposites will appear to be conditions of existence. These elements have been isolated for a certain reason. However, you are being taught and you are teaching yourselves to handle energy, to become conscious co-creators with all that is. And one of the stages of development or learning processes includes dealing with opposites as realities. In your terms, the ideas of good and evil help you recognize the sacredness of existence, the responsibilities of consciousness. The ideas of opposites also are necessary guidelines for the developing ego. The inner self knows quite well the unity that exists. In any given historical period, one religious drama may finally emerge as the exterior representation, but there will also be many minor dramas, projections, that do not entirely take. These represent, of course, probable events. Any of them could supersede the actual exterior drama. In the time of Christ, there were many such performances as many personalities felt the force of inner reality and reacted to it. There were probable Christ, in other words, living in your terms at that time. For several reasons that I will not go into here, these projections did not mirror inner events faithfully enough. There were, however, a score of men in the same general area, physically, who responded to the inner psychic climate and felt upon themselves the attraction and responsibility of the religious hero. Some of these men were too caught in the torment and fervor of the period to rise sufficiently above it. The cultures used them. They could not use the various cultures as launching ground for the new ideas. Instead, they became lost in the history of the times. Some carried on following the same pattern taken by Christ, performed psychic feats and healings, had groups of followers, and yet were not capable of holding that powerful focus of psychic attention that was so necessary.